Welcome back to This Week. I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Cavendish. He's the president and editor of the Nashville Banner, formerly an editor with the Nashville Scene, as we look ahead to next week's Nashville mayoral election. Good to see you, Steve.
Great to be here, Bob.
Interesting race. I think one of the more interesting Nashville mayoral races in quite a while, especially at the beginning. 13 candidates, many of them really qualified candidates. And the Republicans in the state legislature kind of got what they wanted. They want to turn this nonpartisan race into a partisan race, and this one kind of is. You have Republican, self-proclaimed Republican conservative in Alice Rolli, a Democratic progressive in Freddie O'Connell. It's going to be a choice election.
It is. You know, it's interesting because Rolli took a look at this at the beginning. I think she was advised by a couple of people, do you want to call yourself a Republican or not? It may put a governor on kind of what you can do in a runoff, but it definitely got her into the runoff. And then that big field, you know, we saw this in 2015. The more progressive candidate and the more conservative candidate ended up facing off. You know, we're getting this again.
The two that made the runoff, impressive numbers on a field of 13. 27% for Freddie O'Connell, 20% for Alice Rolli. Those are big numbers in that big of a field.
Absolutely. I mean, that's half the vote. And I think too that Freddie did a really good job. You know, he's been the downtown councilman, but he had one vote to change that, and it was the Titan Stadium. And I think he made a career out of that vote, and progressives coalesced behind him for that. It was a pretty brilliant piece of timing on his part.
The Titans vote, him opposing the Titan Stadium deal, and the LPR vote were the two kind of big issues. They didn't get a lot of discussion, but if there were any issues in the race, those were the two. She obviously was on the other side of both of those.
Yeah. And when you hear Rolli talking about she picked up the FOP endorsement, I think in part because O'Connell was against LPRs, but in part because her message has been, let's give the police the tools that they want to use in order to succeed.
Throughout most of the campaign, they all played nice with each other. Late, some PAC money got in, and the negative ads showed up, and in my opinion, they were not very well produced, and kind of on the extreme, calling Freddie a liar. She even kind of pushed back on him a little bit, saying, well, it's the PAC, it's not my campaign. Do those things, I mean, does it look desperate when it comes in that way? When she's run a really good campaign, it is an uphill battle for her being a Republican in Davidson County, but does that help or hurt?
I think it's always bad when you have a candidate saying, well, that's not my ad, when somebody's working from the outside. Typically what you want is, they're not allowed to coordinate, but you do want a certain amount of homogeneity.
Yes.
Thank you. Sorry. Print guy here. Not used to talking on camera. And you want them to work together. And they just didn't, because it was a very sort of extreme message. You hear you hear the failing cities line, and you hear kind of other pieces about it. When Nashville, I mean, it's certainly true Nashville has problems, Nashville has issues, but it's a much more subtle discussion. It's a much more subtle discussion around crime. It's a much more subtle discussion around taxes, around growth and development, and there's nuance to all of this. And I think a lot of people looked at those ads and saw an extreme version of a city that they weren't necessarily living in.
Alice Rolli did well in the general. She'd have to do really, really, really well in order to beat Freddie O'Connell. She would have to win not only the 20% or all the Republicans she can, but she'd have to pick off an awful lot of Democrats. Yep. It's a really tough uphill battle.
It is. So there were 100,000 people in the county who voted for Donald Trump. And she would need to activate a large percentage of them in order to win. I think that in these local general elections, you're never going to have the turnout that you're going to have in a presidential or even a Senate race. So you're working with a much smaller universe of voters. If she could turn out 50,000 of them, it would be competitive. But again, getting those people to activate for somebody besides Donald Trump may be kind of tough.
Yeah, I think early voting is around 50,000 where we are now, so then it had to be much higher than that. If Freddie O'Connell wins, I think one of his biggest challenges is going to be the relationship with the GOP supermajority up on the Hill. Even the speaker was publicly saying anybody but Freddie.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be a challenge. Now, he's been able to do that with some of his other critics, local critics, some local business people he has approached and maybe get a working relationship with. Can he do that with the state?
I think O'Connell's advantage is he's good in a room. He's good one-on-one. Whatever caricature you may have of O'Connell and his politics, when he sits down to talk to you and he talks specifics about policy or an issue, I mean, you've talked to him however many times here during the campaign, he has a real grasp of policy and facts. And I think the interesting thing is that's disarming when you're talking to somebody. And I think their strategy is going to be get him in a room with the speaker, with the lieutenant governor, with some of these committee chairs. And O'Connell has even said this in some of the mayoral forums. You know, he'd already reached out. He knows some of the players that are up there, and that he wants to establish a relationship with them. It's harder to kind of bash him as an abstract sort of liberal figure, or as an abstract, the leader of this city, Nashville, when you know them.
We'll wait and see. Whoever wins this race, they got challenges, a lot of positives. For whoever the new mayor is in less than a month now, what do you think the biggest challenge is as we close out our discussion here?
There's a couple of different things. One is, the transit question long term is tied to so many different pieces. It's tied to growth, it's tied to traffic at its core level, but it's also tied to affordability. O'Connell has told this story a bunch kind of on the campaign trail about, we need to unlock an affordable transit system for people so that we can, they don't have to pay for a car all the time if they want to. He tells this story about, how he was able to sell a car, get on a bus every day, go to work, do whatever it is they needed to do, and that ended up being the down payment on the house that they bought.
We're going to have to leave it at that as we wait for the election results next week. Steve Cavendish and the Nashville Banner, appreciate your time and your insights. Stay with us. This Week continues in a moment. Thanks for spending part of your weekend with us. That will do it for another edition of This Week. I do want to thank my guest, the president of the Nashville Banner, Steve Cavendish. Hope to see you back here next weekend for another edition of This Week. Between now and then, you have a great week.